Welcome to A Fork in Time, the alternate history podcast.
Welcome back to A Fork in Time, the alternate history podcast. I'm Don Shelley, your host. Today I have the privilege of actually being joined in person by my daughter and the co-founder of the podcast. That would be Alexis. How are you today, Alexis?
A little tired, but I'm good.
Good. We're having the privilege of recording face-to-face, which we don't always get to do. And as longtime listeners to the podcast will know, very often when Alexis is involved with an episode, there's a particular area of history that she is most fond of, and she is totally unabashed and unashamed in that fondness. So most of the time, Alexis, when you do a solo episode, where do our listeners get to go with you?
We're going to England.
Yeah, so where are we going today?
Oh, no surprise. England.
Yeah, we're going to England. Now, it's not just because Alexis' birthday is tomorrow, and because I'm being indulgent and allowing her to choose the location of her choosing. I actually think the topic today is a rather interesting topic because it's English history, but probably not an event in English history that's probably overly well known.
Correct.
So if you were the type of person, as if you know somebody who's in this category, who, for example, owns coffee mugs that may... In one case, I think we've talked about this on a previous episode, coffee mugs that actually, based upon hot liquid being inside, what happens? What's one of them?
There's disappearing faces, and there's the 6 Wives of Henry VIII.
We've talked about, I think, that particular coffee mug, but that's not the only English-flavored, English historical coffee mug you have. You have another one, and what's listed on that coffee mug?
It is all the kings and queens of England in its entire history.
Okay, so it's a complete listing of the monarchs of England. And if I were to just name some names for that for our casual listeners, or even our historically astute listeners, if I were to say something like King Henry, you'd quickly say which
one?
Which
There's 8
one?
of them.
Right. Or if I were to say Queen Elizabeth, you may question whether we're talking about Elizabeth I or the current reigning monarch, Elizabeth II. If I were to say Mary, there's more than one Mary in English history with the title of Queen. If I were to say Jane, do you think the average listener probably would really clue to the fact that there may or may not have been, trivia question, was there a Queen of England that we would know as Queen Jane?
Well, I would say yes.
And you would say that because it's listed on your coffee mug?
Yeah, it's listed there, so it must be true.
It must be true. And so you might have guessed, particularly if you're historically astute and know a little bit about English history, today we're going to be talking about a historical what if. Our fork in time is going to center around the lady who's known as Lady Jane Grey.
Mm-hmm.
And she actually was, or maybe was not, queen, right?
Correct.
For how long?
About 9 days.
9 days. So I actually think there was a TV show in the early days of television like Queen for a Day. So she's queen for
9
days.
She did pretty good.
Yeah, she did okay compared to that. And so our fork in time today is actually going to center around what would have happened if, instead of only being queen for 9 days, we had had an enduring reign of Queen Jane. And we would just be calling her Lady Jane Grey. She would be Queen Jane, Queen Jane the First, and how that might have changed history. We talked about this a little bit off podcast before we get rolling here, Alexis. Obviously, anytime you change succession in a monarchy, the way that plays out through the fork is the further you go down, the more the fork branches and diverges. And so you don't have to go very far before you actually start seeing. And then if you go way far down the divergence, you get something different. But this is sort of a critical time in English history, right?
Very critical.
So in setting things up, we will come back after this brief word from one of our affiliates and get rolling here on the podcast. But we'll actually start by sort of setting the stage for the fork, and then we'll go down the fork. So stick with us, and we'll be right back. Taking a break from today's episode, Don and Alexis here talking about something we're really excited about. We've added a sponsor to A Fork in Time. Yes, we've grown up as a podcast. And today we're going to be talking about that sponsor, and that sponsor is Audible. Audible provides audio programming. They provide audiobooks and other audio-themed programs, primarily probably known for their audiobooks, but that's not all that they do. And what's cool about Audible is you can listen on any device. For example, a smartphone, you can listen on your PC. And these are unabridged, complete works. They have over hundreds of thousands of titles on audible.com that you can download and listen to. One of my favorite ways to read is to be lazy enough just to be read to. Also, when I'm driving, my commute to work, something that I can have in the background sometimes. I really do like audiobooks, and Audible, hands down, in my opinion, is the best provider and service for Audible content, audio content there on audible.com. I've been an Audible subscriber since 2006, so I go back quite a ways with them. Alexis, I know that you also use Audible and you like to listen to some things here. We're an alternate history podcast, but sometimes that means we actually read and listen to things that are real history.
Yeah, we have to do the what did so we can do the what if.
Yeah, you hear that all the time. So, for example, what are some recent books on Audible that you've listened to that are actually in the historical what did?
Well, surprise, surprise, they're British.
Who would have thunk that?
I know, right? One of the books I've listened to recently, which is really good, is The Six Wives of Henry VIII by Alison Weir. Alison Weir is a fantastic Tudor historian, so pretty much anything she's written is fantastic. So The Six Wives of Henry VIII was really good. And then I've also listened to The Greatest Knight, which is the story of William Marshall, who was a courtier way back in about 1,000 years ago in the English court, and he had a fantastic life, lived through many different reigns of many different people, so he was kind of a prolific person. So both of those I would recommend. They are fantastic reads, fantastic listens with Audible.
Yeah, and here's the deal that we've done for you, which is that like most things, you probably want to try it before you buy it or test it out. So the offer is this: just go to audibletrial, trial.com/aforkintime. And the offer is this: you can do a 30-day free trial membership, and with that trial membership, you get one download, a credit for a single download. That's a full, unabridged audiobook, for example, an audio program. Again, over 100,000 titles to choose from. You can listen. I think once you do it, you'll find that you're hooked, and you'll find that it's one of the best ways in the world to read is to be read to, even if you're not 5. It works really well. So we would encourage you to take advantage of this offer. Again, that's www.audibletrial.com/aforkintime. You get something for free, and it helps the podcast. We hope you check it out. Welcome back to A Fork in Time, the Alternate History Podcast. Before we took a break there to hear from one of our affiliates here on the podcast, we were starting to talk about the interesting story of Lady Jane Grey, queen for a sum total of 9 days. Mm-hmm. So we said when we came back, we would actually set the historical stage of, as we often say, to know about the historical what if. What do you have to know about, Lex?
The what did.
The what did. So let's sort of talk about the what did and setting the stage for what has happened right before the events that take us back to where we are. And I don't remember if we clarified this. We were coming in. Where are we going back to in the magical now 2-seat what if go back in time machine? Where are we heading back to?
Yeah, we had to put the sidecar on today. So we are headed back to July 19th of 1553.
Okay. And if there's any question about who's sitting in the driver's seat and who's sitting in the sidecar, this is English history. If you've listened to the podcast,
I'm driving.
You're driving. Yeah, you know who's driving and you know who's just along for the ride. So we're going back to July of 1553.
Yep.
And this is the period of time, technically from July 10th until July 19th,
yes.
1553, when you can say that Jane had her 9-day reign. Obviously, for her to assume the throne, something had to have happened before that. What had just happened?
Yes, so on July 10th, her predecessor, Edward VI, had passed away.
Okay, so who is Edward VI?
Edward VI is the son of Henry VIII. He is the only surviving son of Henry VIII, who has passed away at the age of about 15.
And what is his reign sort of marked by?
His reign is sort of marked by Protestantism. He is a very staunch Protestant, and it's marked by how short it is. He only is king for about 6 years.
Okay, and he's a sickly king.
Yes, he's a very sickly king, and also he becomes king at the age of 9. So he's a minor at that. He's a minor, sickly Protestant king. Okay,
so there are regents and the Privy Council and others who are, yes, he's king in name, but he's not exactly running the show like modern 9-year-olds might be. But he's not exactly running the show. And so one of the things that we have, because of him being young, because of how he's succeeded to the throne, he's not an only child, right?
He is not.
So who are his siblings?
So he has two half sisters, Mary and Elizabeth. It is the word half is very important, and they are both older than him.
Okay, so they are both obviously the descendants. Their father was Henry VIII.
Yes.
Who is their mother?
So Mary is the daughter of Henry VIII's first wife, Catherine of Aragon, and Elizabeth is the daughter of Henry VIII's second wife, Anne Boleyn.
Okay, so the two sisters are also half siblings.
Yes.
Edward the King is their younger brother.
Yes.
Who is also a half sibling.
Mm-hmm.
Who's his mother?
His mother is Henry's third wife, Jane Seymour.
Okay, so he is preferred at Henry VIII's death over the two girls. Why?
Well, main reason, he's a boy. The other siblings are definitely girls. And also, because he is a boy, and because of the will of his father, Henry VIII, he's the only one that's considered truly legitimate. Henry VIII does put some stipulations in place in his last will of if Edward dies without heirs, then yes, the crown will pass to my daughters, but he really prefers Edward and his heirs to be the rulers of England.
And of course, a lot of the things that go on around Henry's reign are around producing a male heir. He had two female heirs, but he was seeking the male heir, and that male heir is Edward the Sixth.
Yes.
So when Edward dies, what had Edward put in place? You mentioned what Henry had done for his son and his two daughters. What had Edward put in his will in terms of what his preferred expectations for the throne would be?
Well, as I mentioned, Edward is a staunch Protestant. And it's important to note that his older half-sister, who, given the fact Edward knows at this point as he's dying, he is not going to have heirs. So it's important to note that his older half-sister, who should succeed after him, she is very much Catholic. Very staunchly Catholic. So on his deathbed, or very near his deathbed, Edward puts a stipulation in place that his cousin, Lady Jane Grey, will be his successor because she is Protestant.
Okay, so he has willed the throne to his cousin, not his sisters.
Yes, and you might think, well, why doesn't he just give the throne to Elizabeth? Elizabeth, as you might remember from the real history, is very Protestant. Well, the problem is, because these sisters are both half-sisters, you can't really legitimize one and delegitimize the other one. So Edward was kind of put between a rock and a hard place. If he was going to disinherit Mary from his will, he had to go ahead and disinherit Elizabeth as well, since they were both not by his mother.
Okay. So he selected his cousin, who is also young.
Yes.
She is 15, 16-ish at this point. What legitimate reason does he have to say that she has a claim to the throne when his sisters or somebody else wouldn't?
So she is actually the granddaughter of Edward's grandfather, Henry VII, as well. She is a cousin by one of Henry VII's other children, his daughter Mary. Lady Jane Grey, is the granddaughter of Mary. So she does have a royal bloodline by a different child of Henry VII. And as we've mentioned, she is Protestant. So those are the two things really going for her in terms of being Edward's successor.
Okay, so that sort of sets the stage, and we're not going to spend too much time. Again, we talk about this all the time. It's not a history podcast. It's an alternate history podcast. But again, you sometimes have to know exactly what's happened and the what did before we can stroll down the what if. So in the real timeline of history, the wishes of the king become known, and beginning on July 10th, which is the date of Edward's death, we find Jane is being kept in the Tower of London. We've talked about this off podcast. The Tower of London, don't always think of it as a prison or a place. Sometimes it's good to be there. Sometimes it's bad to be there. But she's waiting at the Tower of London, waiting to do what?
She's waiting for a coronation. She's waiting to be crowned.
So while she is the queen to be, the queen that's been designated in Edward VI's will, she has not yet been formally crowned.
Correct.
And so during this 9-day period of time from July 10th to July 19th, she's waiting at the Tower of London, expecting a coronation, but things are going awry for her. What happens?
So, yes, while Jane is being kept in the tower, being prepared for her coronation, her other cousin, Mary, Edward's half sister, is busy gathering support, gathering troops. There were several factions throughout the country who were definitely loyal to her. Definitely people who were Catholic who were loyal to her. So she is running around the country mustering up support so that she can basically storm into London and say, "That's my crown, I want it."
Okay, so one of the disinherited sisters, the older sister, has made the play for the throne. And what actually happens then on July 19th?
So in the real timeline on July 19th, that is actually the coronation of Mary the First.
Okay, so in the real timeline, Jane's 9-day reign is a reign, so to speak. She really is like the queen in waiting.
Correct, yeah.
While she hasn't been, so she's queen in name, if not formally. The coronation hasn't taken place yet, but that ends, and Mary ascends to the throne. And again, Mary is known by at least one epitaph, probably that most people will know her by. She's Mary the First, but more people would probably call her what?
Bloody Mary.
And the reason she's called Bloody Mary is what?
She burns several Protestants in the course of her reign. I've seen numbers around the 300 mark. So she is, when I say staunch Catholic, she is definitely a staunch Catholic, and she does not like people who do not fall in line with Catholic lines.
And again, remember, this is the backdrop of all this. It's amazing to me, one of the interesting things about, as we've gone through the young history of the podcast here, the backdrop of so much of European history, English history, of course, is what's going on between the Reformation, the tensions that exist between Protestants and Catholics. In this case, it's internal to England, but it has external attributes. We'll talk a little bit about that as we go through and look at the alternate history here. But this just wasn't some minor difference in theology. There was a difference in theology, but it goes much deeper than that, right?
Correct. It absolutely does. Theology is kind of the surface level. There's political things involved. There's different social things involved. So yeah, this was a powder keg, so to speak.
So in the real timeline, and we'll sort of conclude on our discussion of the real timeline and start switching over to the alternate, the forked timeline here right now, is that in the real timeline, Henry has taken England obviously towards Protestantism in his desire to have a male heir and to easily get a divorce.
Yeah, we could talk for hours on that whole subject. I've written papers on the subject, but essentially, yes.
Yeah, and then, so his son, Edward VI, also keeping in line with the Protestant bent that had existed from Henry, and now suddenly with Mary's ascension to the throne, at least for a period of time, I guess roughly for about 5 years, the country swings back in the other direction, and it's violent. That's why she's known as Bloody Mary.
Yes.
So that's the real timeline. We're going to assume in our alternate timeline that Mary is thwarted or that the wishes are carried out, and so the very young Jane Grey becomes Queen Jane.
Yep.
Taking over from her very young, now deceased cousin.
Yep.
And so now we have a young Jane on the throne, a young Protestant on the throne.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some of the differences in what are some of the first things that we might think of as being differences that would have happened with Queen Jane versus Queen Mary early on here?
Well, right off the bat, you don't have that swing back in religious doctrine. We're staying Protestant. We're staying the course. Edward was a very staunch Protestant. Jane was the same way, so there would have been no hiccup in that transition of power. Things would have continued on very much business as usual.
But there are still there are still Catholic leanings in the country. There are still those that would favor, for example, the not now Queen Mary, but now the arguably perhaps passed over Mary, because again, while Jane has a claim to the throne through further up grandfathers and great-grandfathers, she might argue doesn't have as direct a claim to the throne as obviously Edward had a direct claim, succeeding his father. So the argument might be Mary is the older sister, so she's the more she's only been passed over because she's on the wrong side of a religious conflict.
Correct. Much in the same way on the real timeline where Mary was able to garner that support around the country to become queen, if Jane is queen and continues to be queen, you would still have those people who were Catholic who would be trying to support Mary and would be trying to rile up that support.
So is it fair to say, we talked about this a little bit in terms of preparing for the episode, we think of Mary's reign as being bloody. Bloody Mary becomes the epitaph that's there, so much so that there's
a cocktail
named for that. One possibility for this alternate timeline is we may have a cocktail not called a Bloody Mary, but called
Bloody Jane.
Bloody Jane. Can you imagine a scenario where Jane might have been may not directly on her own because she's younger, but where that could have been the outcome?
Definitely. I can totally see her advisors and people who were kind of in charge for her because she is so young. I could definitely see the same kind of scenario we had with Mary, with Jane, of killing Catholics instead of Mary killing Protestants.
So one of the most logical things, we didn't talk about this in the real timeline, it's important to talk about now because it affects the alternate timeline. 15/16-year-old Jane is named as heir to the throne. She's de facto queen for 9 days. She's not crowned. Her cousin Mary is crowned. What's the fate of Jane?
Fate of Jane is she stays in the Tower of London. That's where she is. And it's interesting because her advisors kind of come to her and say, hey, Mary won. She's going to take the crown. And Jane is very much like, I didn't want the crown in the first place. I'm good. And poor Jane, then you have her kind of wallowing in this kind of limbo state for a few months. She eventually is beheaded, but not until February of the following year. She's beheaded in February of 1554. So between July and February, she's just kind of in this limbo state. Mary doesn't actually want to kill her. They're related. They're cousins. And Mary realizes that that Jane didn't want it. She was kind of forced and coerced into taking the throne. So Mary only really her hand is kind of forced, so to speak, and she ends up having to execute Jane simply because she's still a figurehead and is a rallying point for people to get behind.
And what is the charge?
The charge is treason.
Okay, so she is found guilty of, and actually it's her, I guess is it her uncle that is, there's agitators that are other family members that are seeking to undo the crowning of Mary. So the net result of Mary becoming queen is that Jane is executed. So now we're back to the alternate timeline. Imagine the scenario where there's even more unrest with Queen Jane, with supporters for Queen Mary. So instead of Jane being executed in the alternate timeline, one of the things that immediately jumps to mind is it's not a far stretch to imagine the alternate outcome happening where Mary or her followers are tried for
treason and possibly beheaded.
Right.
I think it's absolutely likely to see Mary being beheaded in February of 1554 instead of Jane in the alternate timeline.
So let's assume that in the alternate timeline that is what happens. That's the wonderful thing about alternate history is we can make those assumptions. So let's say in February of the following year, with again a different route to it, but that we find that the execution is of Mary the First, who is as you already said, who is the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, who is from Spain. So the ties are back to Spain. Spain, a very, very, very strong Catholic nation in terms of the conflict that's going on religiously in Europe. So Jane or the council has Mary executed. What might happen?
I don't think Spain takes that really lying down. I think they institute some wars against England, and it's important to note this is the Spain of Charles V. So this is not only King of Spain. Charles V is also the Holy Roman Emperor. He's got some armies at his disposal. So if you suddenly have the situation where Mary is beheaded and charged with treason, you have a very angry Holy Roman Emperor, King of Spain, uncle of Mary I, jumping to her defense and going to war against England.
And again, remember that in the real timeline in 1588, Spain will launch the famous thing they refer to as the Enterprise, which we call the Armada, which is the attempt to actually invade England and place on the English throne a Catholic monarch.
Correct.
That's the whole point of that. So we're 30 years before that. So it's not quite the Spain of Philip II and the Spain of the Armada, but as you point out, it wouldn't just be Spain. It's the Spain of Charles V, who's able to rally all of Catholicism against now a situation where Mary has essentially become a martyr
Right.
for the faith, arguably the more rightful heir given the circumstance. And so you could easily see the scenario in this alternate timeline where there's a strong case being made for the wrongful execution and that something has to be made right, and the only way to make that right is via might.
Right.
And so one possibility of the alternate timeline is that, again, instead of, we still have a bloody situation. It's not the bloody situation with a Catholic monarch, in the case of Mary, trying to hold on to a nation that has been Protestant and still wants to move in that direction, apparently. But it's exactly the opposite, which is now a nation that's under siege by the rest of the Catholic world, because who's been executed is who they view as being the rightful monarch, and she's been executed and passed over for one reason and one reason only.
Right, and also, as we mentioned before, just because the nation as a whole is Protestant doesn't mean there aren't pockets of Catholics still in England. So if you have a situation where Spain, the Holy Roman Emperor, are going to war against England, those people who are Catholic within the country would possibly defect to the Spanish army and would rise up against their own nation.
Okay. So the very short-term elements of the fork are obviously the change in who the queen is, and this idea you could still have something even bloodier than Mary that comes along. But obviously the other thing we talked about when you change lines of succession is that has a ripple effect going down through time.
Yes.
So in the real timeline, following Mary, who becomes queen?
That would be her half-sister, Elizabeth.
And how long does Elizabeth reign for?
She reigns from 1558 to 1603. I can't do that math.
I think it's 44 years,
something
give or take.
like that.
Yeah.
It's quite a long time.
And of course, we know very much from the real timeline of history, the Elizabethan age.
Gloriana, the Virgin Queen. Many epitaphs.
Yeah, all the things that make Elizabeth. But if you have the scenario where Jane remains queen, she's young, so under the assumption.
And married.
Yes, and married. And so let's assume again, for our fork in time, that she remains queen. She's young, she's married. She produces an heir. A male heir.
Mm-hmm.
And is queen long enough to see that heir come of age, to either succeed her as an adult or be old enough to succeed her on the throne should something happen to her. One of the most notable things about our fork in time is what has already happened, which is Jane has become queen. We've talked about how that would be different. But one of the other notable changes is there's no successor to Mary because Mary's never queen, so there's never a queen Elizabeth. So under this scenario, you still have a Protestant England, which is what England was under Elizabeth, but you very likely never see Elizabeth
as queen
or come to the crown.
Correct.
And so, again, this is one of those areas where it just almost becomes impossible to imagine what a fork looks like because real history is so overpowered by this.
It's so ingrained. It's Elizabeth I was Elizabeth I. She was a behemoth of a creature.
Right.
So it's really hard to suddenly have to sit there and imagine England being England without her.
Right. And so one of the quick, easy to think through scenarios is, okay, there would have been something different immediately, Jane versus Mary, but further down, again, you have this thing that doesn't even come close to existing further down the path, which is having no Elizabeth and what flows from that. Of course, the other possibility we've already talked about is what if Charles V had successfully invaded and maybe then either puts Mary on the throne or puts another.
Well, there's another Mary up in Scotland,
right,
who's Catholic and is also related to Henry VII. So if who we know is Mary I, let's call her Mary Tudor. Let's assume that Mary Tudor is executed, and so Charles invades in defense of her. If he succeeds, there's no Mary Tudor to put on the throne, but there is a Mary Stuart up in Scotland who is part of the family. She's descended from Henry VII. She's Catholic. So I think there's there's a possibility we have a Mary Stuart coming down and becoming Queen of England as well as Scotland.
And we know her as Mary, Queen of
Scots.
Scots, but she could have then become Mary, Queen of
England.
England. And again, Mary the First, not the Mary the First that we know
Right.
from history.
A different Mary.
There would not be Bloody Mary, there would be Martyred Mary.
Mm-hmm.
And then subsequently there would be, in some ways you can almost see the poetic way that this would be thought of by Catholics, and particularly Charles V and the other Catholic powers on the continent, of restoring the rightful rule to England. And yes, one Mary died, but yet here comes
another Mary. She's still in the family. We got back on track.
Right. And so again, and under that scenario, again, what we just talked about, there's no Elizabeth. So in the immediate short term, you have the Jane versus Mary situation. Maybe you have a different Mary that we've talked about. Should Spanish forces and other Catholic forces be successful in thrusting upon England the queen that they would have preferred? But again, carrying down the path now of no Elizabeth, to me, one of the more interesting things is who succeeds or follows Elizabeth.
So Elizabeth has no kids. Virgin queen. She dies childless. So we have to do what I refer to as the cousin jump. You got to go up to Scotland. You got to grab, at this point, James VI of Scotland, who comes down and becomes James I of England.
Okay. And now we're so far removed from the original fork, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. But again, for example, the 1611 authorized version of the scriptures, what do we call that?
That would be the King James version of the Bible.
The King James Bible. We would not have a version of the Bible in English that we call
the King James.
Even though the real name for it is the authorized version, that we call the King James version, because
there might not have been a King James.
There might have been a King James, and there would not have been the same thing. We've talked about this on another episode, so we don't want to dwell on it too long. There would have been a different relationship that could have existed between England and Scotland. Under what we've just talked about, if Mary, Queen of Scots, is installed as Queen of England, you still have that same unification that happens of the monarchy of England and the monarchy of Scotland, but it happens earlier. It happens under Mary. And so some of the things we talked about in a previous episode, I think, about the tensions that existed between England and Scotland, maybe still exist. They just exist in a different way.
Right.
And so one of the other possibilities, again, I know we're jumping around a lot here, but it's hard not to. So now imagine we're back under the reign of, again, not of Queen Jane, which is really where this was supposed to take off. We spent a lot more time talking about the installation of a new Mary. But under the installation of a new Mary, you would now have a Protestant, non-ruling Protestant element in England. And so the idea of English Civil War, there would eventually be another English Civil War, may have actually been an ongoing thing that would have happened during Mary's administration. But again, going back to our original fork, which is that Jane has remained queen. So under that scenario, and no successful efforts by Spain to thwart that or to change that, we have a continuous Protestant situation.
Yep, continuous Protestant succession.
Okay. So what else gets avoided down the road that we know? We talked about Elizabeth. What else gets avoided down the road from regular history?
Well, we talked a little bit about the English Civil War. It's possible we never hit that because we don't have James, therefore we don't have his son Charles, we don't have his son Charles, so we don't have an interregnum, we don't have a need for an Oliver Cromwell, we don't have that upheaval that occurs in around the 1640s.
So let's say one of the things that we would see under Queen Jane is less of this instability that came Elizabeth, the future situations relative to efforts to install a Catholic monarch, which do happen with the Armada, but maybe it's a stronger, more continuous Protestant position in England that's been solidified long before that. Is it fair to say perhaps we have a more stable England during this period of time where there's a lot of instability?
I think so. I think when the country is not doing this flip-flop that kind of occurs, you have a situation where other avenues are allowed to prosper. So things like finance, things like trade, things like industry are able to grow and to prosper because you're not having this jumping and changing of who's in power, what the roles are, what the stipulations are. It's just kind of able to continue, so people are allowed to be prosperous and to be successful.
Okay, so we may have a more again, a more unified, stable England a generation later, getting through a lot of this disruption sort of all in one fell swoop because there's not the reversal back with Mary assuming the throne. Jane solidifies Protestant rule and does so in a way that we don't have the disruptions later. Maybe there never is an armada as we know it because it's too far removed and it doesn't make sense. And so you actually have more stability in England, and so you have England as a stronger power because it's not fighting inside of itself. We've talked about this previously on a podcast episode, and so you may actually have England being able to be more influential in the New World.
Correct. Yeah.
You may have England able to be more influential in what it wants to be influential in on the continent, including backing Protestant movements on the continent. It would later do that, but it would have been in a position perhaps to do it with more strength. We know when we actually think of Elizabeth's reign, one of the things that she's known best for is her mastery of dancing around through diplomacy, and that's why she never marries, because she sort of had to keep the options open about who she might marry at any one given time. And so England is able to exert influence, but it's influence despite its lack of strength, not because of its strength.
Correct. Yeah, I think if you have a strong, stable England, of course, we know, being in America, the first English colony is 1607, Jamestown. Are we having a 1587 Jamestown because they're able to explore the New World sooner? Are you having a stronger alliance with the Netherlands, with Germany, with those Protestant nations because you're able to go out and exert that influence a little bit faster?
Yeah, and so again, we may have actually had, with the rise of the Protestant movement being stronger in England, instead of a 1611 authorized version called the King James Version, we may have the Queen Jane Bible.
Yeah, and
or her
1590.
Or her son maybe named Henry for the sake of her.
Or Edward.
Right, or Edward, so being there, taking the throne, being who that's named for, because that's where things would have come.
Right.
Yeah, so I think it is interesting to think through the idea of that 9 days is a very short period of time, but had something happened different and made it more than 9, and 9 days turned into 9 years.
Right.
For example, even if she had not had a long reign for whatever reason, it doesn't take much of a deflection there at that particular point in time to have a very different path.
Right. Let's say she's 15. So let's say 9 years, that's 24. That's plenty of time to have a child and have a child succeed. So even if she's dying at 24, if she's got a son or two, it's totally likely and totally plausible that, okay, you might have a regency, those might be small children, but you definitely have a line to continue if she's dying at the age of 24, just by extending from 9 days to 9 years.
Right. So, again, can 9 days, can 1 day out of 9 change history? The answer is most definitely yes. And certainly the events there of July 19th are an interesting fork in English history in real time. And the fact that they chose a choice was made actually to lead to disruption. A choice was made to allow a Catholic to assume the throne. And the price that was paid in terms of loss of life and the disruption that happens there, because it's only a short period of time later. But if we have a more stable, again, if we have Queen Jane, if she's not just, it's interesting. I'm looking here at the list in the Wikipedia article, just the list of English monarchs. She's not called Queen Jane. She's actually called
Lady Jane Grey.
Lady Jane Grey, and she's titled under the area called disputed claimant. So she has a claim to the throne, a legitimate claim to the throne through the will of Edward VI, but she never actually becomes queen, although she's queen enough to make your mug. So I guess that makes it more or less official, right?
It's fact.
Yeah. So anything else you can think of that are big departures in the historical timeline maybe that we didn't hit?
I think we hit the big ones. This is why I find English history so fascinating. 9 days. We're talking about 9 days. And a figure like Elizabeth I doesn't exist.
Right.
It's things that are so ingrained and so just kind of second nature knowledge, so to speak, they don't happen if this one little thing is just kind of flipped on its head.
Yeah. I was actually thinking while you were talking there about even the scenario, you might have had an Elizabeth, but imagine that you have an Elizabeth at some point down the road serving as the regent for Jane's young son.
Right.
Or something like that. So you may have had an influence of this person that we know as Elizabeth in history, but not as queen.
Or maybe if she's not queen, maybe she marries. Maybe she has a child. Is it possible that one of her children marries into the royal line? I mean, cousins marry. That happens. So that's another possibility too. The reason she doesn't marry in the real timeline is because she kind of has to dangle that prospect of marriage around as kind of this diplomacy tool. If she's not queen, she's free to do what she wants in the realm of marriage.
Right. So we may actually have another interesting side note of this is we would actually be able to have people that say they descended from
Elizabeth I.
Elizabeth, although she wasn't Elizabeth I. She was
Right.
just
Elizabeth Tudor.
Just Elizabeth Tudor. And I think that's an interesting thing as well. Well, again, we appreciate you joining us here today on the podcast as we've taken a little trip back to England together.
Yes.
So thanks for joining us. I'm glad that we were able to record the episode today. As we close out, don't want to spend a lot of time doing this, but we sort of close every episode the same way, normally by saying what to our listeners, Lex?
Thank you.
Thank you. We really do appreciate your time, and we're excited about the fact that we're building more and more of what we think is the community that we're looking to build here on A Fork in Time. In fact, I was looking at our listener stats today. We've hit another round milestone in terms of how listeners are measured. We're up to a big whopping 250.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so, that doesn't sound like a lot, but it seems like a lot when you think that literally less than, 8 months ago when we started this venture, I didn't know 250 people who would be listening on a regular basis. So if you're one of those 250, we want to say thank you. We do encourage you to visit the website. We know the podcast as a medium is a listening medium that you're probably moving around, so you're not sitting in front of a computer when you're listening, and you may say, oh yeah, I want to go check out the website, but you just never get around to doing it. We just invite you to take a couple of minutes to do it. It's www.aforkintimepodcast.com. Among the other things you can find there, if you don't already subscribe to the podcast through your podcatcher or an aggregator of preference, is you can certainly find access to the entire archive of shows. But as we've mentioned before, there's places to provide feedback through our listener survey, through feedback forms, and we're starting to get more of that, which to me is the most exciting part.
Yeah, that is exciting.
It is exciting. We've already, as you know, we've had guest hosts on the show that came as a result of finding us, interacting with us through the podcast, and we know that that's actually been some of the best ways that we've grown the podcast. So we would encourage you to go and do that. Give us the feedback there. There's a number of different ways to do it. Also, if you're so inclined, don't feel obligated, but if you have a few dollars to spare each month and you really enjoy what we do here, you can follow the links there or that are also in the show notes to our Patreon page, www.patreon.com/aforkintime, or following the links that are there on our website, and various ways that you can become a patron of the show and support us that way. I'm looking at the brand new microphones that we're using here as we record. Not both of us talking to one mic, but each of us having our own microphone to talk into. Yeah, it almost feels like we're a real show or something. Is being able to do that. Part of that is the result of obviously the support that we've been able to have received through our Patreon opportunity that exists there. The last thing is I mentioned this before. I'll mention it again. We launched, I guess it was 3 episodes ago, the concept of what we call our fiction focus. I do want to spend just a little bit of time here. If you didn't hear that episode, I would ask you to go back. It's a short episode that just introduces what fiction focus is. But for our listeners, Alexis, what is fiction focus?
So there's a huge subgenre of counterfactual fiction. Basically, it's historical fiction is a subgenre, and this basically takes that and kind of explores it on the counterfactual side. And there are many authors that do this. One of them is Harry Turtledove.
Harry Turtledove.
Harry Turtledove.
As you can tell, I haven't done a good job as a father by making my daughter read some Harry Turtledove. But if you are a listener to this podcast and you come with an alternate history understanding, you know who Harry Turtledove is.
Yeah. So, and he's not the only one. There are several other authors that do kind of the same kind of genre. So we really want to what we're going to do is kind of take one of those authors like Harry Turtledove and kind of just explore some of the topics that they talk about in their books that are counterfactual history.
Right. Now, Turtledove is well known for being a writer, particularly of military counterfactuals, things around the Civil War, things that are around World War II, some of his more popular series. So the idea behind fiction focus is this. We want to hear back from our listeners, who I am sure many of you have read some or all of his works. Want to hear your thoughts on him. I presume you're probably a Harry Turtledove fan. A lot of people in the alternate history world, in the alternate history culture, and yes, I've discovered there definitely is one, would be familiar there. But we'd like you as listeners to give us feedback. So what we've set up on the website is a couple of different ways you can do that. Places you can specifically go to type comments or send us emails that give, what's your favorite book? Which ones of his did you like or not like? What makes him a good alternate history writer in that sort of subgenre of what's often thought of as being science fiction in many cases. In fact, many of his do have a science fiction element to them. So we want your feedback, but we've also even set up a way that you can actually give us an audio feedback, because what we intend to do, and we'll have the actual focus episode or episodes depending on how much feedback we get, and there's a lot of materials to cover for Turtledove. He's a prolific writer, is an opportunity to actually hear listener comments that we've received in writing that we will read, or actually the spoken comments of our listeners. I'll even encourage now, again, we're looking to build a community here. If you are someone who is a massive Harry Turtledove fan and you want to be on that episode, reach out and let us know. It's still not too late to do that. We're going to go for at least another 2 or 3 weeks of collecting the feedback into that. And my thinking on this timing-wise is about once every quarter, once every 3 months, we'll pick a new author to focus on. And I think it's just a good way to recognize that our thoughts on alternate history, meaning mine and Alexis's and some of our guest hosts, are not unique. There's a whole community out there. There's a whole genre of professional, successful writers. Let's recognize them and use them as a catalyst around which we build our episodes and talk about. So I went on for a little longer than I expected it to, but we really think this is an interesting thing for us to do in a way that we can grow the podcast and do something different. So go to the website. It's impossible not to see the Fiction Focus link, and go there, and you can easily see how to provide the interaction that's there.
I just also want to point out about our website, it is mobile friendly. Because most of the time when I'm listening to the podcast, it's on my phone. So, hey, while you're listening to the podcast, just switch over to your web browser, type in www.aforkintimepodcast.com. It's awesome. It's totally mobile friendly, so you can even look on your phone.
Yeah, and it's also it's clean. It's not cluttered with a bunch of ads. There's a couple of links to some of our affiliates and some of the sponsorship opportunities that we've created here. By the way, you can also check out and support the show there by taking advantage of some of the offers. You now hear us. We're trying not to do it too often. We don't do more than one sort of ad or promotional bit inside of each episode, but you'll see that we're doing more and more of that as well. But again, trying to keep it as clean as possible and really about the alternate history. So I don't have anything else to say, Lex, do you?
I do not.
All right. So once again, we thank you for joining us here on A Fork in Time. And to paraphrase that sort of aphorism that's been attributed to Yogi Berra that we've translated over for alternate history, if you happen upon a fork in time, Alexis's suggestion is to do what?
Take it.
Thanks for listening to A Fork in Time, the alternate history podcast. Learn more about the podcast at www.aforkintimepodcast.com. Join us next time.